All right. Welcome everybody to tonight's chat with Gil Hova. I am Avenel Wing with Double Exposure, and Gil's going to be talking to us about game design when the world is upside down. Gil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Gil. I design and publish board games and tabletop games as Formal Ferret Games. You might know my games, The Networks, Higher Rise, Wordsy, and Bad Medicine, and I have a game called Weird Stories coming out soon. And I've been pretty active during this pandemic, and I wanted to offer some tips to folks who want to game design tabletop games while they're socially distancing.
It's great.
All right, so shall I take it away?
Absolutely. Floor
All
is
right.
yours.
Okay, cool. Excellent. So, let's talk about what has happened in the past year and how that has affected game design. So, um, so what happened to me personally was that I had a playtest group that met in New York City twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays. And then obviously COVID hit and it wasn't safe to hold those anymore. So I pivoted to an online playtest group. So I've been playtesting my games online since March. So let me start right away and make sure everybody knows I'm not going to advocate for online playtesting as a complete substitute or improvement for regular playtesting, for in-person playtesting. But right now, this is the safest way to play test with as many people as possible. So let's get into it. Let's talk about where we do these play tests. Okay, in terms of like what are the virtual tabletops that we can use. So we're going to start here with Tabletop Simulator. This is the one that I use the most. I personally think this is the best platform for play testing a board game. In most cases. Individual cases may vary here and there. Now, if you've ever used Tabletop Simulator, you may have used it and then gotten frustrated because there's a huge learning curve. And I mean, you'd be absolutely right. There is a huge learning curve with TTS, 100%. So, hopefully you can find somebody to help guide you through, because once you get over that hump, it's really useful, and you'll be over that hump when you can iterate in a prototype in Tabletop Simulator faster than you can iterate in a prototype that's printed out physically. Which took me a few weeks to get to, but once I'm there, it's like, oh, this is kind of nice. I don't need to print anything. I don't need to slice anything out. One of the secrets with Tabletop Simulator is you can actually host your assets, like all your images, on something like Google Drive or Dropbox and link to those images online. And then every time you update an asset, you actually just need to update it over there remotely, and Tabletop Simulator just pulls it in, and you don't actually need to make any changes in the TTS mod, which is, once you start doing that, it's really powerful and really fast. So once you get over that learning curve, it can be really useful. Also, the fact that it can import 3D models means that there's all sorts of flexibility you can do with weird custom components. And then finally, it has some scripting, so you can always, if you're the programming type, you can always jury rig some solutions. Now, I have some caveats to all that um, with that. So keep in mind that it's not a perfect solution. None of these solutions I'm going to propose are perfect substitutions for playtesting in person. But I think TTS, or Tabletop Simulator, or TTS for short, gets you the closest. It really narrows the gap and brings in some benefits of its own. So that's the first one I wanted to share with you. Next one I wanted to share with you is Tabletopia. Tabletopia's a competitor to Tabletop Simulator. I think it's a fantastic platform, especially if you're a publisher demoing your games. I think it looks better than Tabletop Simulator. I think it's easier for the end user to use than Tabletop Simulator. The learning curve is much smaller. And Tabletop Simulator is a $20 purchase, and everybody involved, like everybody who plays, all of your testers, all of them need to purchase Tabletop Simulator and install it to their computers before starting. Tabletopia is different because Tabletopia has a free tier, which means you can set up your prototype and have people playing with you for free. You don't have to pay anything, they don't have to pay anything, and nobody has to download anything in advance. Now, the downside, and I have to be totally honest with Tabletopia here, is that iterating in Tabletopia is not easy. It is actually kind of a pain to put a mod together in Tabletopia compared to Tabletop Simulator. It actually takes a lot longer, it's a lot more finicky. The platform isn't as intuitive, and you can't batch update assets the way you can in Tabletop Simulator. Like, for example, if you have 50 cards and you need to change the cards, you're either updating 50 individual card images, or you're just re-importing the entire deck as one. So it's not great in terms of iteration, and I would actually recommend Tabletopia more for publishers who have a finished game that they want to demo than to designers who want to iterate on an existing game, unless that game is very, very simple, and or you have some reason to really want to that you don't want people to have to download a link. Like, I'm going to be pitching a game soon to an IP holder. I'm not going to do it in Tabletop Simulator because I'm not going to ask them to make a $20 purchase just for that pitch. I'm going to do it in something that gives them, that I can just give them a URL and say, okay, here you can play on this. So
Right.
that's Tabletopia. It's worth checking out, but like I said, iterating is kind of tricky on it. Then I've got a grab bag of a bunch of other platforms because Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia are the big two. The next one on my list, and I'll go through these super quick, is Screentop. Screentop is a relatively new one. It's still got a lot of rough edges to it. It's 2D top down, which in a lot of ways is really good because it doesn't have the baggage of a physics simulator that both Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator has. Like, Tabletop Simulator is very finicky when it comes to its physics, and a lot when you first use it, you're going to be flipping boards and cards all over the place like crazy. But Screentop, you don't have that so much. It's much more controlled. Um, it's not as feature rich as the other two because it is relatively new. It's a little rawer. It's a little rough, more rough around the edges. But one of the advantages, it's got two big advantages, I think, over Tabletopia. Because it's similar to Tabletopia in that you can give people a link and they just go to that link. They don't need to download any programs. They don't need to purchase anything. So I think it's pretty good in terms of that. Um, Putting together a prototype in Screentop is tricky because it was put together by someone in a very programming mindset. So you have to deal with these things that are like, okay, to put in an asset, then I got to make a variant, and then I've got to make an instance of the variant. And if all that stuff is scaring you off, that's a warning. That's how Screentop works. It's very technical, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. And you can iterate in Screentop faster than you can iterate in Tabletopia. So Screentop, I think, is definitely worth a look because of that, because you can iterate on it very, very quickly. It doesn't have a lot of that baggage that the other ones have. They just did a major update, so it really could be useful for a lot of prototypes once you master its kind of wacky interface. The next one is Tabletop Playground. I haven't used it a whole lot, but Tabletop Playground is set up as a competitor to Tabletop Simulator. They're in the Steam store, just like Tabletop Simulator is. For both Tabletop Playground and Tabletop Simulator, you'd have to go to an online store called Steam and purchase and download the platforms from there, and then you can use them. So Tabletop Playground has a lot of what Tabletop Simulator has, but without the refinements that that Tabletop Simulator has, because Tabletop Simulator's been around for a few years, and Tabletop Playground's only been around for a few months. So we'll see if they catch up. Right now, Tabletop Simulator has such an established base of both people designing games and making prototypes on it, and of people who just want to play games. It's got such a big base that Tabletop Playground has a lot to catch up on, but we'll see how they go. I'm going to go through the rest of them pretty quickly. Vassal was a platform that was made for Advanced Squad Leader. Some people have used it for playtesting. If you know the game Pipeline, Pipeline was tested a lot in Vassal. Ryan had a bunch of tests in Vassal. Um, it is, out of all of these platforms I'm mentioning, the hardest to use. I mean, I'm pretty technical and I couldn't figure Vassal out. It is really, really hard. So if you want to pick up Vassal, know that it's optimized for hex and counter war games, and know that you're probably going to have to take a few days just to do basic functionality. So Logan has a question: is Board Game Arena a good place to test or just to play? Board Game Arena is just to play. As far as I know, they don't allow outside mods on Board Game Arena. That's one of the big differences between Board Game Arena or Yakata or Brettspielwelt or any of those sites as compared to the sites that I'm showing. Everything that I'm showing you allows you to upload your own content, whereas something like Board Game Arena, you're not allowed to upload your own content. They do that all themselves. So those sites are not good for playtesting. So Vassal, be careful about using it. And honestly, I don't really think, like, if you're going to use Vassal, look at Screen Top before you look at Vassal. And everybody who uses Vassal has to download it in advance. It is a Java program. It's free. So that's good. But since it's Java, you might have somebody download it and then they don't have Java. Then they install Java, but it's not the right version of Java, etc., etc., etc. So it's tricky to use. Next is Roll20. Roll20 is a pretty good platform as long as what you're doing is a tabletop RPG and it's really optimized for map and minis based tabletop RPGs. Like if you're playing something like D&D or Pathfinder, it's really made for that. If you're playing something like Fiasco, you can do it, but it's a little weird. It's not really made like it supports cards, but its card implementation is a little strange. So for most tabletop games, Roll20 is interesting. It's worth a look. If you've got something that's map and minis based, it's definitely worth a look. But if what you're doing is not map and minis based, Roll20 is probably not what you want. And that's going to be about the same thing for the next four. Those are all virtual tabletops that are optimized for games like D&D and Pathfinder. So Foundry Virtual Tabletop, Astral Tabletop, Fantasy Grounds, and D20 Pro, all of those are really minis based ones. And again, if what you're working on is a map and minis based game, those can be really good for you. And the last one I put is a really important thing to keep in mind. If you've got like a really super simple party game, or if you've got a roll and write game, you can just get away with Google Apps and video conferencing. So, for example, if you've got a roll and write game, you just give everybody a PDF. They can print out the PDF on their end, or they can put it on their screen and use Photoshop or Paint or whatever to draw on it. And then you go ahead and play and you tell everybody the die results or the card flips, and then they all follow it. So there's some games that can really work off of that model. As far as Google Apps is concerned, in my playtest group, we did have somebody who came in to playtest a game they did in Google Slides. I mean, that's totally legit if your game works on that. Now, generally, that's only going to happen if your game is really simple. If you've got like a relatively simple game, not many components, not many rules, that usually you can get away with that approach. So keep that in mind, Google Apps and Video Conference. One thing I didn't put on here is there's a app that's in beta, I just remembered it now. It's called Vorpal Board. And the idea behind them is they're actually a hybrid approach. They have an app on your phone that you download, and then you mount your phone somewhere, and you point it to a physical copy of a game, and you run it through the app, and the app captures everything the camera sees and then connects to a website, and then everybody plays off of what your camera sees in the website. It's really interesting. So that's called Vorpal Board. I don't think it's available quite yet, but keep an eye on it. It's very interesting. We have a comment: Deadly Doodles by Steve Jackson Games is a good one to do the send picture of the player board and utilize Paint to create your paths. Jonesville85, completely agreed. There's a lot of games like that where a video conference is all you'll really need. Okay, so that's a quick rundown on a bunch of platforms you can use. Obviously, there's no shortage of platforms. That's the good news. The bad news is there's no such thing as a perfect platform. All of them are going to have shortcomings of one type or another, and hopefully you can find a platform that has shortcomings that are not quite so bad. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing, which is the kinds of games that tend to test well. And I'll put a smiley face here because these are generalities that I'm going to list. All of these are generalizations. Okay. I'm not going to say that all of these are like always 100% true. So generally, if you have a middleweight strategic or tactical Euro, that's probably going to test pretty well. An abstract game, one with not much theme and a bunch of uh, bits on a board, like a checkers or chess style game, that's going to test pretty well. If you have any game that's based in cards, from trick taking to CCGs, that's probably going to test pretty well. And finally, if you have a narrative based game like an RPG or a story game, that tends to test well online. What doesn't test as well? That's kind of weird. Games with weird components. I have a friend who has a game that has an unusual component that you drop bits in and they come out at the bottom. And that was, I'm not going to say that was impossible to do, but he needed help from a friend who knew 3D modeling, who could put together a model of what he was doing in a Blender and then import that into Tabletop Simulator. That's not the kind of thing that takes months to learn. You can grab those skills within, I'd say, a solid a day or two of watching tutorials and trying stuff out, and you'll be there. But it's not something that you'll be able to do out of the box. Oddly enough, any game that has card tucking or splaying, like for example, the Network's one of my games, you put cards in and you just sort of reveal the edge beneath one card to another. And that's the kind of thing that these programs have a hard time doing because you click on one and it wants to stack them in a deck, and then you have to say, no, I don't want them stacked in a deck. I just want them kind of splayed. There are some ways to get around that, but they're tricky. So I would say anything with card tucking and splaying is tricky. You have to kind of know what you're doing in order to really do that. Obviously, you can script on Tabletop Simulator to get around that, but I don't think that's a perfect solution. And what doesn't test well at all? Party games and dexterity games, pretty much. A party game, you really want to be reading people's body language, really want to get a sense of how they feel. And a dexterity game for obvious reasons. Tabletop Simulator actually has a flicking gizmo where you can simulate flicking, just like in a game like Crokinole, but it's not perfect because it's an analog. It's not the players aren't actually flicking; they're just doing something that simulates flicking. I think in both cases you could still do a smoke test. In other words, you can kind of test things out to see if your proof of concept works. But anything past that, I think you're in tricky territory if you're trying to play test online, which is unfortunate because party games tend to want a lot of players, so they're not really safe to test right now. Um, in terms of speculation, I'd say over the next year, up till 2022, you're not going to see a lot of party games coming out, I don't think, because they've been so tough to test over the past 6 months or so. Okay, so overall, if you want a summary of what tests well, the more of the action takes place in players' heads, the easier the game will be to test online. The more of the action takes place like on the table, the harder it'll be to test online. Jones L75 says I miss dexterity games. I think a lot of people do. Dexterity games, they're so hard to capture right now. Okay, so let me go to some things to look for when you play test online. The first and most important is what we call the TTS tax. Games played on virtual tabletops tend to run long, about 150 to 200% the runtime. So if you have a game that you expect to last 60 minutes, or you've played the physical in-person version and it plays in 60 minutes, count on it taking 90 to 120 minutes when you play it online. This is just a thing about playing online. It just tends to take longer because it's very different having two hands to manipulate components versus a mouse pointer. You just have like one small point of interface versus 10. You don't really have thumbs when you're playing online. So games played on virtual tabletops just tend to be a little bit longer. I put in a few tips to fight the TTS tax. The first is everyone's the butler. Make sure everybody is trying to help out with setup and upkeep for the game in terms of card draws and in terms of round to round bureaucracy. If everybody helps with that, then that really helps in terms of the speed of the game because it's not just one person butlering things, everybody's doing it. Game Goddess, I know you are. Online, all games become dexterity games, which is so true. Just not flipping the board when you're first using Tabletop Simulator is a hard thing to do. Another thing to look for is custom camera setups. Both Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator have custom camera setups. And If the game you're testing is relatively intricate, like for example, if it has a player board, if it has a main board and a personal player board, you may want to encourage your players to set up different cameras for each. So they have one camera for their main board, another camera for the personal player board, and they can go back and forth just by hitting the number keys. Lets them jump back and forth. Um, and that I found saves a lot of time because you're not manually moving back and forth. You're not scrolling back and forth. You just got these buttons that you can hit that can move you back and forth. Even better, if you're playing on Tabletop Simulator supports picture in picture. So if you've got a game with a personal player board, you can nestle that in a picture in picture window, keep that in the corner of your screen, and then have the main board take up the main part of your screen. And I found that is fantastic. That literally saves 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the game, if everybody's doing that. Even better, you can actually drag things between the main window and the picture in picture window. So you can move things easily from the personal board to the main board and vice versa. So having the TTS, having picture in picture when you're playing a tabletop simulator for a complex game is very, very useful, and that tends to save a lot of time. So those are my 3 tips to help fight TTS tax. Another thing to look for, the loss of body language. Okay. So you won't be able to read players' faces. You won't be able to read their expressions. You won't be able to read whether they're moving back or forth, that sort of thing. I'd consider asking players to turn their cameras on because that way, if you can at least get a sense of their facial expressions. It's really important. This is an area where you have to really watch for consent. So don't force anybody to do this. If somebody doesn't want to turn their camera on, then they're not turning their camera on. Also, understand some people can't turn their camera on. Some people don't actually have functioning cameras in their computers. So don't assume they all have cameras. Um, so that is but and also one other thing to keep in mind, I actually personally find listening and keying just off the voice is easier for me. It might be because I'm neurodivergent, but I get distracted by the different views. I get overwhelmed by all the different faces. Whereas if I'm just listening for voices, I feel like I can parse that a little bit better. Now, of course, I'm not going to say I can do that just as well as I can do in-person playtesting, but I think it's something that you'll find your own balance for. But if you find that you can read body language really well and you rely on reading body language, see if your playtesters are willing to turn their cameras on, willing and able to turn their cameras on. A lot of people do play tests in Discord. Discord is a text and video chat platform, and a lot of online meetings are in Discord these days. In fact, generally when we play test, like when my group play tests, we talk in Discord and we play on Tabletop Simulator. Tabletop Simulator supports its own voice chat, but we don't use it because if somebody gets disconnected, we can still talk to them in Discord. Whereas if we were relying on TTS, if they got disconnected, we wouldn't be able to talk to them at all. So Discord's really useful. Now, Discord has a streaming feature. So if you're playing in Discord, consider activating the streaming feature. That way, anybody in your voice channel can actually watch the game being played and listen to the game being played. Now, most of these Discord channels are private channels. So, in terms of consent, you may want to ask your players, look, do you mind if I stream? But generally, those repercussions aren't so bad because you're still within a relatively closed group of people. But some people may still not want to be streamed. So, keep that in mind. But generally, the only people who are going to be able to hear it are the people in the voice channel, and Discord has a limit of like 25. So, that's it's streaming in Discord. You're not exposing the people you're streaming with to very much. As opposed to Twitch, I've seen some people discuss, hey, we're going to have a booth demo and we'll stream it live on Twitch. Do not do that without your players' consent because the stream on Twitch is extremely public. So you want players to sign off on that. You want testers to sign off on that and say, okay, I'm totally fine doing this on Twitch. Also understand if this is a playtest, that means they're giving you feedback. That means all their feedback will be live on Twitch, and that feedback will not always be glowing, and that's just part of playtesting. So, Twitch for playtests, um, I'd be very hesitant. Twitch for demos, awesome, but Twitch for playtests, not so sure about it. Okay, another thing to look out for is what people are calling Zoom fatigue. So long video conferences tend to drain people of energy. So Keep an eye on energy levels as you playtest with people. Keep an eye on how people are doing in terms of how much pep they have, how much feedback they're able to give. If they haven't talked in a while, be sure to moderate that. While we're on that, when we're playtesting online, it can be tough to read cues and know when the right time to talk is. And if you're running the playtest, if it's your game, may want to make it clear and say, okay, Ralph, what do you think? And then, okay, John, what do you think? And give a little bit of structure and order to know when people can talk. And if somebody's interrupting a lot, um, call them on it and say, listen, you're interrupting a lot. I really want to hear from Ralph first. If you really have something you want to say, write it down. And then when I get to you, we can get to it. So that also helps in terms of Zoom fatigue. Because if you have that structure, people kind of know what to expect instead of like being ready, looking for a point where they can jump in. If you have the tech, consider recording the playtest and watching the playback later. This is a Matt Leacock thing. Matt Leacock loves to record playtests. Even before COVID, he would send his game over and then have people video the playtest and send the video to him afterwards. He watches the video at 1.5 speed without sound, looks for body language, or no, he does listen for sound. He just listens to the sound, speed it up. Listens for body language, listens for rules interpretations, writes it all down on a spreadsheet with time codes, logs it all there, and then he goes to his co-designers or his developers or whoever he's working with and says, okay, there's this thing that happened over here. They didn't understand this rule. They didn't understand that rule. It could be really useful, especially if you want to do a blind test. You can host a blind test on Discord, have people record the Discord stream and play it back to you, or record the video conference, whatever they have. You need a certain tech level to be able to record that sort of thing, but if you can do that, I mean, that could be really, really useful for you. Now, talking about mods, you can really customize a lot of your mods, especially on Tabletop Simulator, where you have a lot of options for scripting. So you can make a really sleek mod that does a lot of stuff for you because you can script it, you can program it. So you can say, all right, so every player gets 5 cards in front of them. So I'll write a script that deals everybody 5 cards. And now you've got to deal with all these weird scripting edge cases like Tabletop Simulator scripting. When a deck gets down to 1 card, it's no longer considered a deck. You've got to be able to catch that situation in your script and so on and so forth. There's all these things you have to be really careful of when you script, and that all takes time. And so it becomes just like when you're working on a physical prototype. If you're working on a physical prototype, a lot of times you're encouraged to not put too much time in your prototype before the prototype is stable. It's the same thing over here. Don't spend 3 days scripting your mod before it's stable, because it'll go in and then you got to make all these rule changes, which necessitates a bunch of script changes. Don't do that. You can do a little bit of scripting, especially if you've got some weird custom components or some strange things that you want to be able to capture in your playtest. But don't spend more time than absolutely necessary on those, and keep things flexible so you can quickly switch things. Same goes with snap points. In Tabletopia, these are called magnetic maps. In Tabletop Simulator, they're called snap points. They're a way you can easily drop something into the same spot on the table. So, for example, if you have a discard pile, you can set it up so a card will always go to the same spot and always forms a discard pile in the same spot. You can go really overboard with snap points and make snap points everywhere, and that takes time. And then if you find out later, oh, but I got to change all this, so I've got to spend another 3 hours. Well, not 3 hours. Got to spend another hour making these snap points nice. Be careful with that. So, uh, be just like with a regular prototype. Don't make it too fancy before the mod is stable. And then things to look for, offering help and sharing knowledge enthusiastically. I think it's really, really important to help online playtests. Okay, so butlering the table, what I was saying before about helping with bureaucracy with the game, make sure you're getting everybody helping with that. Help with orientation. If somebody's new to Tabletop Simulator, if somebody's new to Tabletopia, help them, get them up to speed. Be patient with them, give them tips, but not in an aggressive way, and make sure that they're excited to come back and use these resources more. There is a learning curve. When I first started using Tabletop Simulator, I hated it, detested it, and now I've grown to tolerate it. Not much more than tolerate, but there you go. Um, Help with orientation, I think, is really, really important, and just get people comfortable with using it. And then helping with scripts and custom assets. Like if you're a programmer and you're comfortable learning Tabletop Simulator's programming feature, which uses the scripting language Lua. If you know something like Java or Python, you can pick up Lua very, very easily. Custom assets, again, you can download a program called Blender. It's free. And then spend a day or two watching the tutorials. I'm not going to say Blender is easy. Blender is a pain in the tuchus, but what it can do is absolutely amazing. So, Tabletop Simulator has a feature where you can import 3D objects. So if you have minis or models, you can do that. If you've got a really interesting cube tower, for example, in your game, you can model the cube tower in Tabletop Simulator with proper physics. It takes a little bit of tweaking, but you can get it to a point where the cube tower works much as it does in real life. And that's one of the exciting things about using Tabletop Simulator. So if you've got that ability, help people with that, and try to get people on board. Personally, I've had two playtesters in my game group who were very, very hesitant to start with Tabletop Simulator, and then once they started using it, they became very enthusiastic about using it. But it helps to really pull them in. One person I actually did their mod for them. I actually said, okay, just give me all your assets and I'll make your mod for you. And I made their mod for them and they're like, oh, okay. And then they realized they could play test with people around the world and they're like, oh, okay, this is really good. So those are all things to look out for when you're playtesting. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is help with running an online playtest group. Like I said, I've had some experience with this because my group, Remote Playtesting, has been meeting since March. So the first thing about running an online playtesting group is online safety is not a nice to have, it's a must. Everybody must be safe in your online group. That means no tolerance for trolls, no tolerance for harassment, no tolerance for people who just like to tell it like it is as a pretense for being a jerk. Obviously, playtesting requires a certain amount of honesty, but it doesn't mean being a jerk. You have to be able to find that balance. You need that in an in-person group, and you need that in an online group as well. So we at Remote Playtesting have a code of conduct. It's very clearly delineated what you can do and what you can't do. Super important to do that. Next, have a team of moderators because you can't do it alone. A lot of times you can find your most enthusiastic playtesters will also help you mod. And that helps if there are days when you can't show up to playtest. You know it's in good hands with your moderators. Also, there's going to be decisions and edge cases that come up. And you don't want to be the only person making those decisions. You want to be able to run that all by your mods. I mentioned the code of conduct before. It's important that everybody follows the code of conduct, including the mods. If the mods do not follow the code of conduct, then it's not really a code of conduct. So having that clearly defined code of conduct is really important. Be open to feedback from group members, just as if you were playtesting. This group is not just for you, it's for every member. And if members aren't getting what they need from the group, it's important to listen to them and try to figure out how you can adapt the group so that it gets what they need. Likewise, if there's a change you want to make, be sure the change actually helps the majority of the group. And it doesn't disenfranchise, even if you have a large minority of the group that it disenfranchises, stop because that's probably not what you want, you don't want to have 51% of your group happy and 49% unhappy. You want to get as many people happy as possible. So if there's a compromise you can find that makes everybody happy, look for that compromise. Listen for feedback. Make sure that people understand that you're willing to implement any feedback you find reasonable. Discord bots. If you're running your playtest group in Discord, bots are so useful. Um, for example, you can have bots that help you with codes of conduct. You say, okay, here's the code of conduct. Once you read the code of conduct, react to this message with an emoji, and we'll unlock the rest of the Discord for you. But until then, you can't actually participate in the Discord until you do so. Personally, I found that people don't read the code of conduct, they just hit the smiley. So what I've done is I created a Google form where you don't actually get admittance into the group until you answer every question in the form correctly. The form is actually a quiz that has questions about the code of conduct, and you can only get through once you answer each question correctly. Obviously, your mileage may vary, it depends on what you want, but make sure you have bots helping you as much as possible. Also, there are some bots out there, like yet another general purpose Discord bot is the name of the bot, that lets you do self moderation. So people can assign themselves roles. And I find those are really, really useful also. So by doing that, you can have people assign roles that are their pronouns, for example. So you can click on a person and see what their pronouns are. You can have them show what kind of games they enjoy, so you have a sense of what kind of games people like to play. People like customizing stuff, and those bots really help with that. And then finally, other groups are not your competition. There's going to be other playtest groups out there. Work with them. Try to elevate everybody. A rising tide floats all boats, as they say, and you really want to be part of that rising tide. So don't compete with the other groups. Try to find ways you can synergize. Uh, there are a ton of groups that my group's members are also in. So we have people playtesting like just about every night of the week. They play test in my group 2 nights, 1 or 2 nights of the week, and the rest of the time they're play testing in other groups, and it can be really, really useful. So don't look at them as competition. Don't kick them out of your group because they're in another group. Work with them, integrate with them, try to find the synergy. Um, and that's about that. I want to thank everybody for listening so far. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type in the chat. Um, Avi, if you have any questions, feel free to pop in and ask. But yeah, this is all stuff that I found in the last, I'd say, 6 months of running an online playtest group and moving all my playtests online.
I do have some questions.
Excellent. Hit
I
me.
was taking notes while you were talking. So you mentioned that on Tabletop Simulator, one card isn't a deck, and once you like in your scripting, you have to be prepared for that.
Yes.
What are your favorite sources for finding those gotchas so that you're not discovering them while you're fighting with a script and tearing your hair out?
When it comes to scripting, what I've been doing is I've been uh, really leaning on people in my group. We have some people in our groups who are programmers, and one person in particular, his name is Dawson, and he's amazing. He's given me a bunch of amazing feedback about that. Other than that, it's Google is really where I go to. There isn't really very many good formalized places where there's a lot of really good scripting advice in terms of, oh, is this happening, then you should do this. Right now it's a lot of institutionalized knowledge. One of these days I'm going to put together a Google Doc with all the things I've learned so far, but that can't happen as long as I'm in the middle of running a Kickstarter or prepping to run a Kickstarter.
Almost like you have a few things going on.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay. So my next question was related to the code of conduct.
Yes.
You'd mentioned that it's important. I absolutely agree with you. If somebody is looking for a sample or is completely just lost as to how to begin, where did you start?
We actually started by so I adapted our code of conduct from the New York City Playtest Code of Conduct, and we adapted that was the in-person group I ran, and we adapted that code of conduct from the Board Games Artisans of Canada uh, Toronto Guild code of conduct. With their permission, I reached out to them and asked if it was okay if we could adopt their code of conduct and use it as a starting point. They said enthusiastically, yes, you absolutely can. And several other playtest groups have used our code of conduct as a starting point, which I have encouraged. I think it's really important to use codes of conduct. So I'm going to supply a link in a moment to my playtest group, which has a link to the code of conduct. I don't know if I can type it in the chat. I can try to type in the chat, but a lot of times that gets censored. So let me give it a shot and see if I can do it.
Okay.
One moment. I'm going to try to do it in a way that doesn't mess up my stream. Here we go. Okay, I've copied the link. Now I'm going to try to paste it in the chat. So I can see it in the chat. I don't know if other people can see it in the chat.
It came through on this side, but I don't know if that's because it's my chat.
Nope, I think it came through for you. It should come through for everyone. So yes, if you can see what I just pasted there, that's our play. That's not a direct link to our code of conduct. Oh, it's here. People can see it. So it's not a
Awesome.
direct link to our code of conduct, but you can get to our code of conduct from that link, and you can see what we did for it. And I'm not going to say that it's a perfect code of conduct. It's certainly not going to be a perfect code of conduct for your group because every group is different. Every group has its own needs, but you can at least use it as a starting point.
Absolutely. I'm also going to mention that there are a couple of Creative Commons codes of conduct out there that you can also modify.
Mm-hmm.
I will, at some point, like when this goes up on YouTube, I'll include a link to the one that we're using currently to modify for the Metatopia code of conduct. But there are resources out there, and Gil, maybe you guys might decide to put yours up under Creative Commons so that people who are searching can find it and adapt it.
Yeah, at some point we really should. Yeah.
I may offer to do that for you guys at some point after Metatopia so that people have as many resources as possible.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Cool. So then I'm going to wander out into the intersectionality weeds for just a second.
Oh, please do.
Let's brainstorm something other than blind playtest for what that thing is.
Oh my gosh, I've been trying to wean myself out of that term for a while. Did I use the term blind playtest in my talk?
Yep.
I did, didn't I? I've been
It
trying to wean.
happens. It sneaks in on me too. And I don't
Yeah.
have something that pops off the tongue as easily.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to actively use use the term rules playtest instead, which I think is more descriptive of what I'm trying to do. Because I'm not testing the rules. I'm not testing whether the rules are working, whether the game's broken. I'm testing whether the rule book is understandable and whether players can grok the game rules.
Right.
But yes, I'm trying to pull that out, and of course, sometimes it just slips in.
Oh, it does. And if anybody out there comes up with something as evocative as blind playtest, because there's a certain amount of the metaphor is useful and productive.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't found anything that hits the same emotional resonance without accidentally being ableist.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. I also, what was the other? Nope, it flew the coop.
That happens all the time to me.
Yep.
All right.
I think that does the audience have anything else they
Yeah,
want to
I'm happy to
ask?
answer any questions from the audience. Absolutely. Usually takes a little while for that to go through because of the Twitch delay.
Have you play tested anything that you were super excited about that you can tell us about?
Oh, have I play tested anything? A lot of the stuff that I've play tested virtually is still fairly far away. I play tested an amazing prototype, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday before. And we finished it, and I'm like, well, I really don't have any feedback for you. This is great. There are a couple of little bits and bobs here and there, but I'm like, no. I mean, he mentioned that the designer mentioned that there was some publishers that rejected it. And I said, why? I mean, that was such a perfect fit for them. So I really wish that I could tell you about that one, but until that one gets signed and announced, I don't really feel comfortable about talking about it just yet.
Yeah, I'm not asking anyone to spill anybody else's trade secrets.
Yeah, but there are some really exciting prototypes that come through our group, and I'm really excited about them coming out. Oh, you know what? There is one actually that I should mention. Matt Wolf brought Squaring Circleville in at one point, and that's going to be published from Spielworks.
Okay.
Actually, you'll be able to see it this weekend. They're doing a bunch of playthroughs on Twitch. They're calling it Conworks with two X's, of course. So one of the games they're showing on Twitch is Squaring Circleville, and that's a really, really good game if you like those heavier Euros. And it's based on a true story. It is about a town in Ohio called Circleville, where all the blocks are in a circle. and it made so many problems that I think during the Industrial Revolution they got tired of it and they were like, okay, we're switching to rectangular blocks. But it involved all sorts of engineering feats, like they had to raise houses up from the ground, that sort of thing. So it was actually quite an intricate project to square Circleville, and that's what Matt's game is about.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's so it sounds like it hits your sweet spot of very thematic and all tied together.
Yeah, and not your typical theme, but not like a silly theme either, but a really solid, interesting like theme that you can really get into.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. So, that was Conworks, you said, this weekend?
Conworks with two X's
Awesome.
this weekend. That's from the publisher Spielworks. They're in Germany, Uli Blennemann's company. And Formal Ferret actually shared a booth at Essen with Spielworks last year, so they're friends of mine.
Awesome. Okay, so I feel like we're kind of winding down. We don't have any audience questions. So, where do people find you on social media?
At Gilhova is the best place if I move my head out of the way. Hopefully, I'm moving my head in the right direction, but I have a feeling I'm not. I'm probably blocking it. So let me try moving my head over here, and then this way you can see it. Yep, I can tell now I moved my head in the wrong direction. But I've moved my head over here. You can see it. At Gilhova is where you can find me. Yep, right over there. You can find me there on Twitter mainly. I'm finally really starting to use my Formal Ferret Games Facebook account. You can find me there. Don't send me messages on Instagram. It takes me forever to get to them. But yeah, Twitter is probably the best way if you want to reach out to me. Also, I have streams on Twitch every Thursday. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this Thursday for this Thursday stream. I might play High Rise Solo as a celebration of my Kickstarter, and then I might do some more High Rise streams later in the month. But you can catch me every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern to play High Rise. Oh, somebody has a question. Any thoughts on perceived balance versus true balance? That's an excellent question. It's always a really tricky subject because uh, when you have a game that has all these sorts of interesting factions or wild cards, you can have something that your spreadsheet say is completely balanced, that your playtest shows completely balanced, and then somebody plays it for the first time. They're like, this card is way too powerful. And sometimes you can get, I mean, that's going to happen regardless. There's always going to be some crank on BGG who insists your game is broken. But if you get up, you might get a majority of people, or not even a majority, just a vocal minority of people saying your game is imbalanced because card XYZ is too strong or too weak. Um, and even though your data says it's not true, they perceive it to be not true, and perception is reality. And it's something you got to do. You got to deal with. I think that if you're in that situation where enough people think your card is part of your game is not balanced, then your game is not balanced, even though it is, which is awful and it's unfair and it shouldn't be, but it is. So you can come up with ways that it seems like you're changing the card, but you're really not. You can use cognitive biases, things like awarding the other player points instead of costing a player points is an excellent way to make to reduce the loss aversion cognitive bias. So, for example, if people think this card is too powerful because it takes points away from another player, you could say that this card gives points to all the other players, and you'll find that people will say, "Oh, okay, that makes it fine," even though mathematically it's exactly the same because you're working off that cognitive bias. So you can mess with their perception without actually messing with the actual mechanics of the game, and that's something to look out for. So for me, I think I try to pay attention to perceived balance. At this point I treat it just as importantly as true balance, and I try to like work with the two and try to make sure they're aligned. Perception is reality.
Well, the other thing that I've run into is that what a play culture considers balanced can change so dramatically from one community to another that sometimes you have to just accept that maybe this group plays this card particularly cutthroat, or right. And so it's a matter of, does that feedback appear across multiple play cultures, or is this a specific instance in this ecosystem? And if so, how do I tweak it to adjust for ecosystems like this without changing what it does?
Absolutely, 100% agreed. I had one group. that I met once who insisted dogmatically that any game where players had different numbers of turns, like the player who ended the game is not the player to the right of the player who started the game, if that was the situation, that the game was automatically broken
Right.
because the players had an equal number of turns, which is not true. I mean, if you have enough turns in the game, it becomes a wash, and it winds up being, well, this it becomes more important to know when the game ends and be able to account for the when the game ends. Then it's important to have each player have equal number of turns. Some games are just like that. The more turns players get, the more likely that you want that information of when the game's going to end, instead of wanting everybody to have the same number of turns. But that wasn't the case for them. They just had this dogmatic view, and they wouldn't let go of it.
Sounds
So
like somebody came from a big family where fairness between the siblings was really important.
yeah, that's very possible.
Okay. So if somebody is looking to find the playtesting group, where do they go to find it?
Go to that link that I posted in the chat, bit.ly/rem-play-intro. That is a Google Doc that gives you all the information about what we do. It's like an info dump. Has all sorts of info about our playtest group, all sorts of questions that we answer. Has a link to the code of conduct, and has a link to the sign up area. So you go there, and that will answer all of your questions and more.
Cool. All right. I think we're wrapping up. So, Gil, take a second and tell us about your Kickstarter.
Oh yes. So tomorrow at noon Eastern, I am launching High Rise, the Ultra Plastic Edition. My game High Rise is sold out. It came out in July and sold out in a matter of months, just a couple of months. So I want to make a new version of it. So this is going to be a reprint with a module that is plastic buildings. So this is something that I wanted in the game from day one, but I wasn't able to swing it with the original Kickstarter. Now I can. And if you click on that link that we just posted, it says 12 p.m. Eastern. That's when the Kickstarter launches, but you can click it now, and you can follow the Kickstarter, and you'll get an email when the project actually goes live. So the Kickstarter is going to have these plastic buildings that are going to add to the game's sense of dimension and verticality. Already, the game has chipboard, punchboard buildings, which are two-dimensional. They actually look really good. I'm really happy with the punchboard buildings. But I mean, there's something about like the 3D physical buildings that's going to be amazing. I can't wait to see people paint them and make them just look amazing. It's going to be really incredible. Put together a lot of like brown and silver and blue paint and just make those buildings pop on the board. I'm really looking forward to that. The Kickstarter is also going to have some new expansion content. We have these tiles called tenant tiles that change the rules of the game. There's 45 in the game box, and you only play with 15 or 20 per game. And we're going to have at least 5 new tenants, but more if we hit various stretch goals. So I would love to hit those stretch goals and give you a bunch of new tenants. So sign up for that campaign and go to it, and hope to see you all tomorrow.
That's amazing. I have one more note, and then we're going to
Yep.
call it for tonight, which
Yep.
is that we are launching the playtesting area of the Envoy Gateway to coincide with the with Metatopia.
Great.
And we would love to get you guys set up with an area there so that people that are coming into the gateway that want to find the playtesting group can find you through there as well.
Awesome.
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 All right. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we call this a night?
I think the only other thing I need to add, if you want to hear me talk more about game design, I'm on a podcast called Ludology. I'm on that with Emma Larkins and Scott Rogers. Jeff Engelstein, who is one of the original founders of the podcast, occasionally pops in and gives us his wisdom and then pops out again. Jeff is absolutely amazing, and he knows more about game design than I'll ever know. So he's phenomenal. So it's just really great having this way that I can talk to game designers all around the world, and there's so many fascinating things that come up, and we try to go through all sorts of topics from crunchy mechanical topics comparing different mechanisms to these more chewy topics about consent in games and safety in games. Which is, I call it chewy, but it's no less important. It's just instead of talking about math, we're talking about human feelings. As long as humans are playing games, I think those are really important things to talk about.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Cool. All right. Thank you for coming, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. Um, Someone in the audience says Jeff is bonkers smart.
Oh, so
That's
smart.
so true.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We will see you soon.
Bye, everyone.